right, it's all right.
Neil, where are you going?
I don't know, darling. We'll be together, so that's the main thing.
When I go somewhere with black and white tiles on the floor, I freak out.
It's all right.
I don't know where to pack it all.
What do you want? Get loads of clothes.
I can't anymore, it all fit.
Oh my God. Come on.
I have nothing to pack it and I have a small little suitcase.
Do you want me to go get your massive suitcase and pack it? Come on, hold this.
I can't. Why are they doing this? They're evil.
It was just our family home. Tiny, tiny little village that held our lives. It was just everything to us.
I can remember sitting in a house and saying, how have I done this to my family? They gave me my account, they gave me my credit cards, they said they would do the deal. I wanted my youngest daughter to go to theatre school. All that went out the window. I got a cup of coffee, but it cost me 1.1 million. Their whole attitude changed from being friendly. They've put a person in a corner, given them no options and say they'll blow their brains out. And that's my feelings on the Clydesdale Bank now. They are contaminated with greed and profit at the expense of the businessman.
I'm always surprised at the number of business people immediately tell me about attempted suicides, nervous breakdowns. We got to the point where it's just, we kind of expect it. It's very common that people's marriages have broken up, they've lost their family homes. It is spectacularly devastating for people's lives.
On the 6th of the 6th, 2016, my children were at home alone. So Warwick was in bed, asleep, and my two daughters were in their bedclothes, and suddenly they had all this shouting at the door. They didn't go to the door, and suddenly it got more and more aggressive, banging at the door, saying that they were bailiffs. So my daughters were absolutely petrified, as you would imagine.
Might have any sentimental value and all that.
Two men posing as bailiffs crowbarred the door off and just burst into the house. They then said that the children had to leave the house, they manhandled them, they threw them into the street. We raced back to the children. When we got back there, they were in a very, very bad state, as you can imagine. Crying, sunburnt, it was just horrendous. And then there was just one man there, who was the man who had crowbarred the door. We have video footage of him, and we actually have photos of him. And I found out from the children that he was also wearing a like waistcoat with pockets, which he'd filled with loot. So we were calling 999 over and over and over again. We called the court said there's no warrant on the house, and anyway, our bailiffs would never ever do anything like this. We wouldn't be allowed to do anything. So we then started to realise that there was something very, very odd going on here.
So you're not going to show your IDs? You're not going to show your IDs? Is that a no?
This man then said that he wouldn't let us back in our own house. I explained that I have Crohn's disease and I needed to get back into my home. I needed to go to the toilet. He refused point blank to allow me into my own home.
There's that, record everything.
All right.
I have been told that this is completely illegal from the courts.
Finally, when the police came and I show the police the paperwork and the police say this is an illegal eviction, you need to be allowed back into your property. When we got back into the property, we saw that they had smashed the windows of our home, they had vandalised the home. The children have never got over that day. Because that was the day that they took our lives.
Thank you, pilgrims. Yes, we've got a really buoyant atmosphere here, despite the fact that the banker is very much in the ascendancy. We are looking for somebody to come out here and give the banker a really good spanking.
Like many things in life that are truly life-changing, life-defining, unless you've experienced it, you don't fully understand it. And so observers around the outside kind of think, you know, what's this all about? You know, a couple of friends sort of said, gee, did you really try to kill yourself? What's that all about? You know, life's never that bad. But they weren't in the quicksand. They were standing on the rocks around the pool. My relationship with the Bank of Scotland went back to the 1970s when I started to become successful with the BBC. And I think the way that these things normally come about is your accountant says, oh, there's a really good bank manager, and the bank manager recommends a good solicitor, you know, it's that sort of thing. And I had a great relationship with the Bank of Scotland. And it was built on trust. And you trusted the bank manager because he was the person who signed your passport application. He was the pillar of the local community. I never assumed that my popularity would continue. I never assumed the BBC would keep offering me shows. So when in the mid-80s I got the opportunity to earn some money at one of my first loves, which was flying helicopters, I then set up a helicopter company, Helicopter Management. And that was the beginning of Unique Aviation. We moved into providing brokerage and management of aircraft, including private jets and things. It wasn't making a fortune, but it made money. In fact, in the 80s, I was probably earning £1 doing corporate work for every £1 I made with the BBC. And this was the beginning of Unique Group. At the time, I just thought, as we became under more pressure from the bank, that we were doing something wrong. In the end, I thought it was my CEO, who had been a friend of mine for 15 years, godfather to one of my daughters. I thought it was his incompetence. I couldn't believe that we were having problems with the bank because we were not breaching covenants. We were operating always within the agreed facility. But of course, now I realize we were groomed. They've got you. These people have got you.
I think broadly the fraud worked that a company that was a totally viable company, the bank would offer them a loan, the company would go on, it would pay back the money it was owing, its interest, and then the bank would suddenly call in the loan at very, very short notice and not even allow some of the companies to pay back the money which they had. They would then immediately put their own valuers into a company, value the company at a fraction of what it was really worth. They put in their own insolvency practitioners. They would then sell the company off for far less than it was worth, and then go for the personal guarantees of the owners of the companies.
It's not just businessmen, it's not like guys like me in suits and shirts and ties. It's people who have, as a businessman, have worked really, really hard to build these businesses. Some of them are second, third, fourth generation family businesses. So it's integral to their whole life. So they lose the business, they basically lose the family, they lose their life. Torex employed 3,500 employees. It provided software, services and hardware to restaurants, hotel chains around the world. It was a viable, vibrant British technology company. In my first 100 days as the CEO, doing the sort of traditional 100-day review, I found some historical accounting errors that I thought were suspicious. So as a CEO, you have a duty of care to tell the banks that have been lending the business money of any concerns you have. So I went to RBS, who were the lead bank of 5 banks that lent money to Torex over the years. They were the agent effectively. And I met with them. I explained that as a non-accountant, I was just concerned with historical accounts. And what I wanted to do, the right and proper thing to do, was to bring in some specialist forensic accountants to audit and review the past year's accounts. So I informed the bank, I told them what I was then going to do about it. They agreed to that, and within 24 hours of that, RBS had suddenly brought in these restructuring specialists. Well, the business didn't need restructured or refinanced or anything. There was a historical problem. But within that 24-hour period, another 24 hours passed, and then I find that the business is basically being pushed into this thing called GRG, the Global Restructuring Group. And when I queried this repeatedly, I was repeatedly told, oh, it's a restructuring unit. It's like an intensive care unit. We're here to help. We will support the business. We will continue to support management of the business until this potential issue is reviewed. And that was just a complete lie. GRG's function was not to restructure or to support or to help the management and employees of a business, as I later found out.
Global Restructuring Group is part of RBS. It basically came into being in about October 2008, just after the bailouts were first announced. And it was a respray of an existing organization within RBS called Specialized Lending Services. But essentially it became a vast depository for tens of thousands of business customers of RBS, many of which had done absolutely nothing wrong, and many of which were creditworthy, profitable, and viable companies, which were put in there through Machiavellian means. So companies were told this was a part of the bank which was going to help nurture them back to health. It was like an accident and emergency ward of a hospital. They were informed that it was, on their side. It was there to help, to get them out of their problems, and then they could be put back into the normal banking relationship with their existing relationship managers. But in reality, it was absolutely nothing of the sort. GRG was essentially more like an abattoir or a slaughterhouse. It was there to carve up these businesses and to enable RBS to extract the maximum value possible from these poor businesses that ended up in that part of RBS.
Who among you have an arrogant bankers demand as a condition of continuing support, all of which demonstrate the viability for the future are contemptuously dismissed by those same bankers who were offering you a lifeline. You plead with the bank, you do whatever you can, and you know it is all going to fall on deaf ears. You've got that gut-wrenching heartache that comes with the announcement from the court that you're going to be made bankrupt. That is the reality for thousands of victims like us.
We'd kind of slipped under the net, you know. They felt, what are these Turners doing? Why have we not stopped them?
Who are these pesky people?
Someone told me that when you went into, if anyone talked about the Turners in HBOS, they'd either go like that or they'd be carrying garlic. Well, we met in 1973.
Three.
Yeah. I went to Paul's office, such as it was then, because you were moving in, because I was meeting a girlfriend of mine who worked in Paul's music company. And although we can both remember that meeting, we didn't actually get together until 1990. So we were two miserable people who went out to dinner eventually, and
she seduced me.
Mrs.
What
Robinson.
can I say? I was reticent. Like hell.
I was living in Italy, so whenever I came back to London, I'd always want to go and work at Zenith because it was like the company to work for. It was just such fun, you know. It was all these big bands going out on tours, so you could always get to, you know, good tickets and backstage passes, and it was just a lot of fun.
And started the publishing company and realised that the best way to exploit the music, singer-songwriters, because we were recording them for demo purposes, but we were recording them in such a way as they were finite recordings. So the best way to exploit what you've required for publishing is to put it out. What we needed funding for was marketing.
We developed the products, we had our own recording studio, we got the products that far, now we needed the money to market.
To plug.
And to make a video. We made a fully
all the
animated
marketing strategies you need for the music business. We put all our resources into developing the business, as you have to. I sold the bottom half of our garden, I cashed in the pensions, and just built the business up on that.
We may as well have taken that money and just ripped it to shreds and then set fire to it, because for all the good it did us. It can't be your fault if actually you're not running your company anymore, and this is what's happened right across the board, is the banks, in order to get these assets, have decided that having screwed their own businesses so successfully and brought everyone to their knees and caused mass austerity, they have the right to run other people's businesses.
And they know how to.
And that they know how to. So, for example, Lyndon Scowfield put a 22-year-old trainee accountant who was seconded from Smith & Williamson's in to run our business. She didn't know about the music business, she didn't know about any business. It's not possible. And to be fair to her, she would get quite hysterical when we just would not go along with what she was saying. But our hands were completely tied because she had fiduciary control. And this happens, I see it all the time in SME Alliance. People who know nothing about your business are put in place to run your business on behalf of the banks. And you have to ask yourself, what is their intention? Because obviously, if you don't know someone's business, you can't run it successfully. So the intention would appear to be, pull the companies down, steal the assets.
total fraud in this country, according to Portsmouth University, is around about 193 billion a year, which is staggering. This isn't just the banks that have been involved in this, it's the accountancy firms, it is the lawyers, and also it is the insolvency practitioners and the valuers of land who have quite clearly, and it came out in the House of Commons debate, have undervalued the assets of companies by over 50%. And very often this becomes very clear because when they've been taken over, they then sell the assets for twice what they valued them at.
Customers. 1 o'clock in the morning and they all think they're comedians. It's got even worse now because the bars are open to 1 and 2 in the morning. Then you're back open again at 6 o'clock to do breakfast. My name's Jim McGrory, ex-hotelier from St Andrews. I bought the hotel back in 1972 for £30,000. It was basically a high tea house. Over 10 years or so, I built it up to a 15-bedroom hotel. Dining room sat about 80 and the bar had about seating for about 120. Ran that to 2005, but decided I was buying my sell-by date and I wanted out, so I sold it for £1.5 million. Took the money and gave it to the Clydesdale Bank to invest for me. I bought a guest house, which was £380,000. I bought a house in Canada that I converted into a bed and breakfast, and also bought a student house that I converted into an HMO. The bank were well aware of what I was doing. When I first approached the Clydesdale Bank, they were very helpful. I was offered a variable loan. So I was then sold a TBL, a tailored business loan, which said it had flexibility in it and would give you any movement you wanted. You could change it as you wanted. It seems to be that the loan that they sold us had no contingency in it. It was what it was is what you got. If you wanted to repay the loan, you had a break clause. If you wanted to borrow more money, you had a break clause. There was nothing you could do with it. It was basically a toxic loan. It was a time bomb loan, as we called them, TBLs. So it was, in some respects, a fixed rate loan with a variable break clause that you had no idea what it was, and the figure would be whatever they produced. There was no way that you would be able to quantify or calculate that figure, because you needed a degree in almost astrophysics to be able to do it, following curves and trends in the market. None of us were that type of businessman. All we wanted to do was run the hotel.
Have had thousands of businesses coming to the MPs trying to deal with disputes on the back of things like RBS's Global Restructuring Group. Obviously the HBOS Reading fraud is a much more extreme example of this kind of misconduct, but still essentially what we've identified between all the financial institutions where perhaps they were trying to pull in loans quite quickly in order to recapitalize the banks, that conduct fell by the wayside.
So he pushes my business over the edge, pushes me right to the edge of bankruptcy. And I was picking myself up again, and wham, at corporate level, they came after me under my personal guarantee. And they took me right to the edge of a high court action when they knew at the highest level of HBOS Lloyds, they knew I was actually the victim of criminal behaviour. And a man called Rory McAlpine suddenly appeared on the scene. Now, of course, at the time, that meant nothing to me. But ask the Turners about Denton Wildsapt and Rory McAlpine. And then you start to see that when the management, the senior management, wanted to get heavy and get their result, they brought in these dirty people.
I used to pace up and down the kitchen because Lyndon would not talk to Paul. So it was my job to try and keep Lyndon on side and at least get answers from him. And he was very often not available because he'd nipped off to Las Vegas or he'd nipped off to Thailand. And we would have artists who wanted to be paid and wanted to know what we were doing about their album covers or this or that and the other. And money would be going out of our accounts to pay Quayside, which we never knew when. It would just...
They just take it?
They'd just take it. And they never took...
tell you you're going to take it.
It didn't take 1 month at a time. And I would spend, I think, 2005, 2006, I would spend at least a couple of hours a day pacing up and down trying to get hold of Lyndon.
The Bank of Scotland had two kinds of managers back in those days, hunters. Hunters would go out and find business, and then once they got you signed up, they then delegate it to farmers, and the farmers were your relationship manager. Business Link put us in contact with him. He sent us an email saying he'd have to delegate it to, he called it the credit committee,
which
turned out to be HBOS Reading. Yeah. When the debacle happened, or started to happen, and the bank were trying to pull us down, the one thing you can do most things with artists, but if you spoil their dream, in other words, if you do not come up with the
what
video to promise, then they pretty much get pissed off very quickly and they walk.
Businesses that were completely servicing all of their loan payments still had the loans called in on the back of a loan-to-value ratio breach that was based on a valuation where a surveyor hadn't even gone to the site. They'd just done a quick desktop valuation of the business. So essentially, it's a very easy way to do what we call an engineered default of a business. And once a business is in that position, it's very easy to put them into administration and insolvency. And so we have cases here where businesses that were completely washing their face and were cash positive still were put into administration. What we were finding when the financial crisis hit was one of the ways that was quite easy for financial institutions themselves to go around and say, right, we want your assets revalued, you're now in breach of your covenant, and so even though the business is going along fine and the debts are getting paid there and the loans getting serviced, it's still technically a contractual breach and is enough of a reason to put the company into administration. And so we've seen that happen time and time again to businesses.
I would like to think the Financial Conduct Authority is on top of this, but they have known about this for a very long time and not much seems to have been done. And I think where they have slipped up badly is the protection of whistleblowers who simply are not protected. We have no system to protect whistleblowers properly, and the whistleblowers being made rapidly redundant, and people are very frightened. They are very frightened of losing their pensions if they go on making a fuss.
RBS orchestrated two key things. One, my suspension, despite me being the whistleblower. And two, they put in place their own nominated, effectively shadow directors, which in itself is improper and illegal. And in that period, not only did they punish me for blowing the whistle to them, but I also blew the whistle to the London Stock Exchange, the City of London Police, the Serious Fraud Office, because those accounting anomalies were now beginning to look as if they were potentially fraudulent and criminal. So I then became a protected person as a whistleblower, as designated by the Director of the Serious Fraud Office and the Head of Economic Crimes at City of London Police. RBS ignored those legal protections and kept me on suspension for 4 months, during which they effectively took control of the business through the shadow directors. They then put in their own advisors, their own consultants, and within 4 months, they put the company into administration, and then they asset stripped it and sold the assets to Cerberus, a vulture fund, who are notorious in New York as being the lender of last resort and the buyer of last resort, for a total price, including all advisors' fees, of £204.4 million. 4 months earlier, I was sitting on 8 offers from 8 of the biggest technology funds in the planet for in excess of £600 million. So the allegation is that between RBS and Cerberus, they stole 400 million in making an unjust gain to the loss of my shareholders, bondholders, employees and suppliers. The accountant that was brought into Torex Retail PLC was KPMG. They were brought in within 24 hours of me raising issues about accounts with the bank. And RBS forced KPMG's own forensic accounting team upon the business. Then they appointed KPMG as corporate finance advisors. Then they appointed KPMG as turnaround specialists. And then 4 months later, when the business had gone up for sale, they appointed KPMG on the other side of this as the court-appointed administrators. So our KPMG orchestrated this, executed it for RBS all the way through.
I do find it fairly extraordinary that KPMG, who audited the HBOS accounts and failed to notice apparently a £40 billion hole in their accounts. £40 billion is one hell of a lot of money, and also managed to overlook a £1 billion or nearly £1 billion fraud in their Reading office, which they were told about. Were also the auditors of the Cooperative Bank, where they seem again to have missed a hole of several £billion, and just immediately recently were also the auditors of Carillion, who also seem to have a massive hole in their accounts. They seem to make a habit of this.
Worst period, certainly for me, were this period where we were in and out of court for repossessions, and we've got people like Andrew Scott from the bank coming to the Cambridge County Court, but we've also got Rory McAlpine, who's the deputy chairman of Denton, or Denton Wild Sapt as it was at the time.
600 strong law firm.
Coming to Cambridge County Court on 6 occasions to evict a middle-aged couple out of a bungalow.
It cost £372,000 for Rory McAlpine to attend 6 of our eviction hearings, and Christ knows what else he was doing in the background. And how do we know that? Because they opened a false bank account in our company's name They paid the £372,000 over the period in chaps payments, one's 53 grand, 64 grand, 36. It added £250,000 in interest and charges to the account, and they asked us to pay it back. It seems from looking at a lot of other cases, and the common denominator is not that they were high risk. The common denominator is they complained. They complained, and Reading became a repository for difficult customers. You'll read in the press, HBOS Reading, the impaired assets division. It was never the impaired assets division.
Well, we've never heard that
until they discovered and then covered up what Lyndon Scowfield was doing. And they very definitely covered it up because they investigated it from January 2006.
Whether it's RBS GRG or whether it's HBOS Reading or
Barclays Business
But
Support.
yeah. The first thing is destabilise the business, and then they can go in, and it's almost as if they go in and say, right, this business isn't going well now. Forget that we caused it. We're going to put a team of people in to make it go well. But actually, that's not their intention at all. The team is going in with the intention of taking the asset or assets. And sadly, that very often includes people's houses, people's family homes, because you might have a protected mortgage, almost certainly you have.
You signed a personal guarantee.
But once you sign the personal guarantee, it's nothing to do with MCOBs anymore, or COBs, it's all to do with unsecured commercial lending. You've got no protection.
I've got a house full of paperwork. I've got a 1 terabyte hard drive that's all full of banking emails. I said, with Debbie Crosby, she came in and she was all, we want to settle. They said, you've had a very hard time, Mr. McGrory, and we'll have the money in your bank on Monday. And I said, well, that's fine. When the accountant was there, Ian Jennings, and my wife said, well, we'll get primary losses paid on Monday and we'll look at consequentials later. Oh no, there'll be no consequentials. There'll be no betterment out of this deal. And I can't give you that deal that you want. Otherwise, my door will never be closed. I said, no, it should be. If you've done the same to me as you've done to some of the others, why should they not get reimbursed for their losses? That is Debbie Crosby, who was a GOC of the Clydesdale at the time. It was a real pain in the ass.
If we were to allow the to present our constitutional claim that we didn't use the legal test payment form, I would have myself in a situation where, we would end up in conversations with all sorts of people.
I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got 5 laptops. That computer, 1 through in the office and 1 down the road, and they're all full of this junk. It becomes, it is a cancer. No, it becomes part of your life, it takes over your life, and it means that you can't do anything. You're stuck. Their whole attitude changed from being friendly to being almost like the Gestapo. We'll take your house, your teeth, your glasses before you send you to the gas chamber. And that's my feelings on the Clydesdale Bank now. They're worse than the guards in the gas chamber. They are contaminated with greed and profit at the expense of the businessman.
I have had 17 mobile phones in the last 2 years. because they all get hacked. There has been wiretaps of my home phone. I get attempted computer hacking 2 or 3 times every day, and had computers and data stolen, but never wallets and watches. They don't even bother to make it look like a robbery, because it's not surveillance. They want you to see them. I personally have been attacked twice. My elderly parents and my children have been put under surveillance and have been intimidated and harassed. And the Met Police wrote to me and said that they were investigating it as part of my ongoing position and situation with the Royal Bank of Scotland. A state majority-owned, taxpayer-owned bank in this country allegedly employing corporate intelligence spooks to effectively harass customers. I'm a customer to this day. I'm a shareholder of RBS. And these are the lengths that they will go to stop me investigating them, campaigning against them, and taking legal action against them. One day I got a knock at the door, and it was a senior police officer from the City of London Police who'd come all the way from Oxford with a member of a unit called the Anti-Terrorist and Public Order Unit. And this guy was ex-Special Forces, and they basically instructed me that I had to leave the country and do so within 24 hours because the state could no longer protect me. That was the lowest point. When you realize that your own country, your own state is no longer able to protect you, and they're asking you to leave, and they're even offering you witness protection, which I declined. So I ended up going to live in Italy, forcibly going to live in Italy for 3 months, which lasted for nearly 2 years, which I again funded myself. But every time I returned to the UK for 2 years, I was warned against returning.
We were on the street, and they then made us stay 35 miles away from my children's schools. It was costing me over £150 a week just so that my children could go to school. I eat, sleep, live in a blow-up bed. That's what I class as our life, because I love plants, so I've tried to create a kind of home environment just on 3 windowsills, really.
You don't sleep. My wife is a very strong character, but we sleep in separate beds because we don't sleep. You're waking up at 2 and 3 in the morning. Sometimes you don't even know why you're waking up. Most of us are psychologically damaged. They get destroyed mentally. They don't see any future. All they see is blackness, like depression. My experience of of senior bankers, they were either dismissive or condescending to you. They would turn around and say, you should have, by the wave of a hand, you should have read your terms and conditions. You should have done this, and we have well warned you. I said, you've warned me of nothing. This is our bedroom. Well, we do, everything is done here. I spend my time in the computer all the time, reading emails, sending stuff, reading stuff from the Royal Commission in Australia that's taking the banks to court. It's really quite interesting. That's my certificates. First Dan, second Dan and third Dan. One, two, one, two, one, 1, 2, 3. That's a basic kata. This is done as a means of defence. It can become an attack. There's a thing called sticky hands. You actually go. So sticky hands is done with 2 hands.
Is it?
And if the other person knows what they're doing, you can actually do it with your eyes shut. You don't need to see the person because you're actually in contact with them. Yeah.
Thanks for beating me up.
It's okay. I like to do that to the bank.
I fully appreciate the jobs that 70,000 RBS employees do. When I go into a branch and there's a clerk or clerkess earning 12,000 a year or 16,000 a year just doing a job, that's what they're doing. They're working in an organisation, they're doing a job, and they're trying to do their best. They're unlucky because they're working for a criminal organisation. But I don't have an issue with the general employees of RBS at all. I am very focused on what I consider to be organised criminal misconduct by this GRG unit that goes all the way to the CEO, previous CEOs, and to the current and past boards. I truly believe that it was deliberate, it was intentional, it was coordinated, and it was known about by the board. In fact, it was driven by the board because it was so important for the board to collect all this cash in. And even if it meant businesses and lives being destroyed, it was so important to the survival of the bank that the board basically not only turned a blind eye, but they directed it. And they're all culpable. Every single financial misconduct scandal in the UK and in every other major financial jurisdiction, whether it's Singapore, America, Europe, RBS is always at the heart of every one of these scandals. So then what's worse is that the banks, having taken security against the loan, come back for a second time and call in what they call the personal guarantees, which for most small businessmen is their home. So the bank come and forcibly repossess the family home, which then splits the families up and they end up going and living with parents in different homes. And that causes marital tensions, problems with the children. And some men and women can't take it. They have committed suicide but left behind notes that explicitly state that it was the constant intimidation and bullying by bank officers and consultants and advisors to the bank that led them to utter despair. It's obscene. These people have no soul.
Generally, the advice is from solicitors that say if you want to really take on a financial institution is dig your heels in, clear your diary for the next 10 years and have several £1 million behind you to do it. We got to the point where it's just, we kind of expect it. It's very common that people's marriages have broken up, they've lost their family homes. It is spectacularly devastating for people's lives.
It was definitely a shit time. I mean, we were very stressed.
Inevitably, because the bank are not allowing us to pay ourselves, we get behind with our mortgage payments. And they try to evict us on the back of this. But we're playing this game for 3-4 years.
We were so focused, our poor daughters, you know, didn't realise, for example, Laura had holes in her leggings and her best friend replaced them for her because she didn't want to come to us and say, I desperately need some new leggings for school, because she knew we didn't have any money. So, you know, she'd seen us scrambling around in the filter of the tumble dryer for, has someone
20p.
lost 20p out of their jeans pocket or down the side of the sofa. It was that bad. We would be numb until we'd actually done the hearing, but we would fall to bits on the way home. And I'd have to go in and just go to the guys, oh, I've got a terrible headache, I must go to bed, because I would just be shaking. And it's very hard to concentrate on anything else when you've got that going on, because you're living in perpetual fear that you're going to lose your house. And so it was a period where, you know, you're just anxious all the time. Sunday mornings was car boots.
Loved that.
Loved that. We used to do car boot sales, but you do get to the stage where you've run out of...
Yeah, we pawned all the, quite a lot of the studio equipment and nice instruments, and God knows what, and family heirlooms, you know, lovely watch my father had and stuff, which I found the receipts for yesterday.
So we can go back and see if they're back.
See if Cash Converters still got the stuff 10 years later.
We were pretty sick of spaghetti by the end of it, even although I'd lived all those years in Italy, and you know, fortunately I can do 100 different dishes with tins of tomatoes and spaghetti and garlic.
This is a school that Warwick and Tiranoka used to go to, and this is the kind of like lifestyle that they had. It's really tranquil. It's a very academic school. Everybody's almost like a family. But unfortunately, what we've ended up with is nothing compared to this. We've had all of this ripped away from us. The worst moment for me was finding out that not only had they crowbarred the door on my children and vandalised the home, but to actually say to them that I'd left them.
Three chairmen of Lloyd's were written to in detail about this. and now deny they knew about it. They very well knew about it. And in 2013, an internal document was written in Lloyd's, which lays out the entire fraud that went on within HBOS and Lloyd's in great clarity. It names the names, it names the companies involved. The whistleblower on that case was actually immediately made redundant and has never been compensated properly. I find the whole thing quite extraordinary. But also, Lloyd's have denied consistently that it was an official report, where it is quite clear from their own internal emails that their head of risk and audit commissioned the report.
Norman, old boy, I tell you, even the Cray twins and Al Capone didn't have this amount of police investigation. Norman, you're quite incredible. I am asking you questions.
This isn't a show, Mr. Edmonds. This is an AGM, and I'd like you to come to your question, please.
Now, Norman, if you want to turn it into a game show, the way you treat us, I would call it pointless. And if you want it to turn into jail or no jail, you are going in the right direction. You put out a press statement last week that it was not commissioned by Lloyd's Bank. Yes or no? Did you commission the report?
The press statement stands as it is.
That you did not commission the report?
The press statement stands as it is.
That you did not commission the report?
Yes, the press statement stands as it is.
I don't know how you would ever rebuild trust in Lloyd's. Maybe you start by shooting the fucking horse.
You can't have a normal life in any way anymore. They've taken our life, knowingly. And I am worried that, you know, we were so close, and now, you know, we do argue, we worry about money, we've been hungry, we're homeless, and that's it.
It's disappointing that a government minister, when he's presented with that level of evidence during a parliamentary debate, is not willing to actually do more to address the problem. They're so dependent on reprivatising RBS. Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, has said he wants to do it in roughly over the next 5-year period. They're so dependent on the money that they might raise from this reprivatisation of the bulk of RBS that they're willing to turn a blind eye to the bank's egregious behaviour. I guess it's part of a wider problem within the UK, which is putting banks on a pedestal. Heroes of the capitalist system who were paying such huge amounts of tax and who were providing so much wonderful credit to fuel the wheels of the economy, that they were revered and pampered and mollycoddled and almost worshipped.
When you realise that it's not individual companies, it's not a few companies, it's not a few small companies, that here we are today and it is at least 30,000 British businesses, that makes it a £100 billion problem. We reckon that there are thousands and thousands of cases across America, and we're going to launch legal actions, the classic US class actions across America against both banks. Meanwhile, we're also working on criminal legal actions in Germany under European Union directives. Now, why should I, as a Scotsman, in addressing and looking at the misconduct of RBS, have to go to America to get the American federal authorities and regulators to take actions, and to do the same in Germany, when for the last 8 years the British government and the British regulators have literally done nothing?
The individuals who the authorities could be looking at would include people like Nathan Bostock, who was the Director of Restructuring and Risk while all this was going on. The intense period of abuse within GRG happened on his watch. He now is Chief Executive of Santander UK. Derek Sage, who was the global head of Global Restructuring Group. Laura Barlow, who was the UK head of Global Restructuring Group at the period of peak abuse of 2009 to 2013. And there are others as well, including the head of West Register, a man called Aubrey Adams, who came from Savills. And there's even like people lower down the tree in Scotland. There's a couple of individuals who every single person I've spoken to says behaved in a very abusive, potentially criminal manner.
Well, until British society, whatever you want to call it, the regime goes, this is wrong, you're not going to change anything. And you're not going to stop the inevitable happening. And I am seriously not a political person. But we will have civil unrest in this country. We will have a revolution. I genuinely believe there is enough evidence in history to say that a nation in post-imperial decline has one massive change in its status and then is destroyed.
I think that it's time that one of these banks has to be brought down. Somebody has to be made an example of to let the rest of them know that they're not going to get away with it. Unless they are brought to task, they will still always think they're untouchable and no one can bring a bank down.
Let's just, truth and reconciliation, get it sorted. Social media means you can't lie anymore, boys. So don't. Let's just, all right, it happened.
The HBOS Reading story is an extraordinary one. I think a vast number of companies were being defrauded quite clearly through the Reading branch of HBOS, and this was all over the country. It's very difficult for the police to actually take on a case like this. But in this particular case, two of the people who've been defrauded, Nicky and Paul Turner, they correlated it all to this extraordinary case, really, with a vast number of companies.
I've never really been that interested in money, so it doesn't really make it. It's a means to an end, isn't it, money? And I'm a great believer in if you are blessed, you should share your blessings. And what was the point of going through all this shit if I can't help others?
The bigger it is and the more complex it is, the more the defence tries not really to defend it, but to make it understandable for the jury. So the jury simply don't understand it. And I think that was how the defence worked in this particular case. I'm delighted to say that we had a sensible jury, and I think it was probably reasonably well prosecuted. I think the police had very good evidence, and we had a judge who kept everybody under control, and the right verdict was reached. But it was a very long case. I think his remark to the defendants when they'd been found guilty was, boys, the game is over. And I would like that to be said to all the bankers in the other banks. Boys, the game is over. You've got to stop doing this.
was interesting that some people had helped us, and so we were really happy to be able to give them back the money and double the money. And some people had supported us, and so we just wanted to give them a gift because everybody could do with some money. And the number of people who either refused it or burst into tears. And so we'd have to really push them to say, no, 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 come on, please, take it. No, no, can't take it. And it was awful because I was phoning friends up and, 10 minutes later, they're still crying. It was really, money is a strange animal, isn't it?
I want my loan rescinded. I want my business debt-free where it started from. If they can pay themselves bonuses for crippling people, then they should be able to heal the problems that they've caused by giving proper redress.
The only way we can do it is go back and play RBS at their own game. And that's the legal game. But this time, rather than individuals like me, we do what I like to call the I Spartacus play. That we this time step up, and when RBS look behind me, they see thousands of people stepping up and bringing their case, and we have what they call in the US a class action, but here in the UK it's called a group litigation.
Everyone thinks they're the only victims, so finding victims meant that everyone knew that they weren't. The first thing they learned is, actually, I wasn't the bad businessman. I was being screwed by a bank.
Yeah. And I think we all found support in each other.
Clearly, the police are now taking this a little bit more seriously. And Thames Valley Police now have multiple Operation Hornets, and we now know the National Crime Agency are involved. Well done, Anthony Stansfeld. It feels, with the support that I've had from respected people in the media, that things have changed.
I want my home returned and I want compensation. Whilst it won't put everything right, we're entitled to that because we want a life back. I want to be able to live my life. I want to be able to enjoy memories with my children. I want to be able to have something to hope for. I can fight them.
So we come to these meetings in London to get the pressure off you. Everybody talks to one another and they then realise that they're not on their own. So it's a wee bit like psychotherapy, and everybody discusses their problems. Then you realise the problem's not just yours.
This absolutely destroyed a huge number of jobs, companies, livelihoods and families.
In general, there's so much evidence out there of wrongdoing. These people cannot be above the law.
Fabricated documents have been used throughout all of these things normally to take people's assets. Those fabricated documents are processed through solicitors through courts. Those then are used by the BIS, be it in Watford or be it in Victoria, and then they use those to prosecute people.
So who's calling the shots in this country? Because they are refusing to investigate.
And as I have always thought, banks were there as our servants. They were there to actually help us, not screw us out of existence.
The government today are still in denial, still playing for time, and we've got this ridiculous compensation scheme being cynically played out by RBS's PR advisors as being the solution. Oh, we've dealt with GRG, there's a compensation scheme in place, nothing to see here anymore. There are already whispers around the House of Commons that this action will be the end of the bank as we know it, and that there will have to be a second bailout to fund this compensation. Like all the great scandals in the world, you know, it takes years and years for the truth to come out, and ultimately people get justice and they get a degree of compensation. But actually, now for many of the victims, what they actually want is closure. And they all know that the country and the bank can't afford to give 100 pence in a pound. And they know they're going to get a fraction back. At the moment they're getting nothing back, but they know they'll get a fraction back. For the great majority, they'll be happy with some financial compensation. But they also want to be vindicated.
Let's pick a date, 2050, when the social historians look back at this first period of the new millennium. How are they going to assess what on earth we got up to? Are they going to note that the greatest casualty of this huge expansion of globalization and communications was the destruction of trust? I mean, how can you ever trust a bank that invents solicitors within it? How can you ever trust a bank that created fictitious bank accounts as it did for the Turners? How can you trust a bank that bribes a defense witness, as in my case? I really have learned a lot about how all this came about, historically. But the thing that really does upset me is what it's done to the United Kingdom, what it's done to Great Britain, because it frightens me for the future of this country, because there is a high level, deep corruption, and I cannot see a bright future for Britain unless something pretty cataclysmic happens.
I think that despite the efforts of parliamentary committees and working groups looking at solutions such as a new tribunal system and changes to contract law, these are all things that are useful, and there needs to be changes to regulation to stop this ever happening again. But I'm concerned that politically we're deliberately diffusing the whole situation. We're deliberately losing sight of what's the only important thing here, and that is justice and compensation for the historical victims of what was recently described as the largest theft anywhere ever.